Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're uncovering the story of Emperor Harshavardhana. Now, he wasn't born to be some grand unifier. Instead, he forged a massive empire from the ashes of a terrible family tragedy, becoming the last great emperor to rule a unified North India.
Okay, let's dive right in. Picture this. It's the 7th century CE, and North India is in chaos. And at the heart of it all is a teenager, just 16 years old, who is suddenly thrown onto a throne, not because he wanted it, but because a series of brutal, shocking events completely shattered his world.
So, to really get a handle on Harsha's incredible rise to power, we first have to understand the fragmented world he was born into.
After the mighty Gupta Empire collapsed, North India basically shattered. The unity it had provided for so long just vanished. What was left was this patchwork of small, competing kingdoms. This created a massive power vacuum, a landscape of constant disorder, with no single authority to hold it all together.
But out of this chaos, one family starts to make a name for itself, the Pushyabhutis. They'd started out as vassals under the Guptas, but from their capital at Thanesar, in what is now Haryana, they began building their own power. And under Harsha's father, Prabhakara Vardhana, they became a real force to be reckoned with, setting the stage for what was to come.
All right, this is where the story gets really intense. We need to talk about the tragic and incredibly fast series of events that forced a young Harsha onto the throne. And this isn't just political history. This is a deeply personal story of loss and vengeance.
I mean, the chain of events here is just breathtakingly brutal. First, his sister's husband is murdered and she's thrown in prison. Then, his older brother, the brand new king, marches out to get revenge and succeeds, only to be treacherously assassinated himself. In a flash, Harsha's family is decimated, leaving a teenager as the ruler with two immediate burning goals: save his sister and get justice for his brother.
And this says so much about his character. Before marching on his enemies, before even thinking about consolidating power, his very first priority was a personal quest. He literally raced to the Vindhyan forests and found his sister just as she was about to commit sati, to throw herself onto a funeral pyre. This one act shows you a man who is driven just as much by family as by any imperial ambition.
With his sister safe, Harsha turned all that grief and rage into action. He embarked on a massive campaign of what's known as Digvijay, which basically means a conquest of the world. For him, it was a mission to unify all those fractured lands of North India under a single banner.
For 6 straight years, Harsha was just constantly at war. He made a crucial alliance to flank his main enemy, Shashanka, and then drove him out of the really strategic city of Kannauj. And then, in a brilliant move, Harsha made Kannauj his new capital. From there, he just systematically conquered huge territories, eventually adopting a title that broadcast his ambition to the world: Lord of all of northern India.
But you know how it goes. As his empire swelled, a collision with the other great power on the subcontinent, the Chalukyas in the south, became pretty much inevitable. Harsha, Lord of the North, set his sights on the Deccan, a land ruled by the formidable emperor Pulikesh II.
And Harsha's seemingly unstoppable expansion came to a grinding halt. We know this from an inscription that was actually commissioned by his rival, Pulikesin. It poetically describes Harsha's big defeat, saying his mirth melted away by fear as his prized war elephants fell in battle right on the banks of the Narmada River.
And that was it. That single decisive battle was a major turning point. It defined the absolute limit of his power. The Narmada River became the hard border between the two great empires, and Harsha would never again try to march south.
So halted in the south, Harsha kind of shifted gears. He moved his focus from endless conquest to consolidating his rule, fostering a really vibrant culture, and exploring his own personal faith. Now, what's really interesting is that despite all his military might, Harsha's reign actually saw a big economic shift away from the Gupta Golden Age. Trade slowed down, coins became scarce, and a more feudal system started to take hold, where officials were paid in land grants instead of cash. It kind of suggests that the cost of all his wars might have really strained the imperial treasury.
Yet, while the economy was changing, culture and learning were absolutely flourishing. And get this, Harsha was a playwright himself. He actually wrote 3 Sanskrit comedies. He surrounded himself with literary giants like his court poet, Banapata, and was a huge patron of Nalanda University, the greatest center of learning of its time.
The Chinese traveler Xuanzang, who visited India during Harsha's reign, gives us this stunning picture of Nalanda. He described it as this international hub of knowledge, with over 10,000 students, a famously difficult entrance exam, and a curriculum that covered everything from philosophy and medicine to astronomy.
Harsha's personal faith also went through a pretty big evolution. He started his life as a devout Shaivite, a Hindu worshiper of the god Shiva. But later in his reign, he became a really passionate advocate for Mahayana Buddhism, a change likely influenced by his sister and his friendship with Xuanzang.
So, to honor Xuanzang and promote his new faith, Harsha organized this just massive religious assembly at his capital, Kannauj. The scale was incredible. 20 kings were there, along with thousands of the greatest scholars and monks from across the entire religious spectrum of India.
So you might imagine this as a peaceful, enlightened conference, right? A meeting of the minds. Well, the reality was a whole lot more dramatic, and it really showed the deep tensions that were simmering just beneath the surface.
When Xuanzang argued for the superiority of his Mahayana doctrine, the assembly completely exploded into violence. A full-on riot broke out, a fire was started in the pavilion, and an assassin even tried to kill Harsha. It just goes to show that even an emperor's decree couldn't stop the intense religious rivalries of the era.
So, after a dramatic 41-year reign filled with war, culture, and controversy, what did Emperor Harsha actually leave behind?
Well, the answer is surprisingly temporary. In 647 CE, Harsha died, and he left no heir to the throne. The entire empire was so tied to his personal authority and charisma that without him, it just collapsed. It fell apart almost immediately, leaving another power vacuum in North India and marking the end of an era.
If we boil it all down, these 5 points really capture his story. He was the unifier, who put a fractured North India back together. He was the avenger, whose reign was literally born from a quest for justice. He was the limited conqueror, whose ambition found its hard border. He was a great patron of culture. And finally, he was the transitional figure, the last great emperor of ancient India, standing right at the doorway to the medieval period.
And his story leaves us with a pretty provocative thought. His empire, built through sheer force of will, was this brilliant but really brief flame that was snuffed out the moment he was gone. It really makes you wonder about the nature of empires in unity. Is a unified India more of an exception than the rule in its long history? It's a question that has echoed through the subcontinent for centuries.